The book of Daniel is a book in the Old Testament of the Bible, and it was written by the prophet Daniel, who had been taken captive and deported to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar in 605 BC. There he served in the government for about 60 years during the reigns of Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, Darius, and Cyrus. And so yeah, the book starts off basically in the way I just described there a little bit. Daniel is taken captive by the Babylonians, and Jerusalem has been besieged, stuff is going down, and from there on out, I mean, the book of Daniel turns into like one of the greatest, most mystical, wild books in the entire Bible. Daniel, his big claim to fame, I mean, it's not really his claim to fame, it's God's claim to fame, is he can interpret dreams. And it's really fascinating. In the beginning of the book, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, he's taken Daniel and other wise men captive. He has this dream, and he asks his people, his advisors, what does this dream mean? And they're like, well, tell us what it is, and we'll tell you. And he said, Nebuchadnezzar's like, no, I want you to tell me what my dream is. Then I would know that you're actually giving a correct interpretation. Nobody can tell Nebuchadnezzar his dream without him telling them it. And so Nebuchadnezzar orders, basically, all of the wise men to be killed. But Daniel prays to the Lord, and, he begs, hey, let me see the king. I can tell him his dream. Daniel obviously tells Nebuchadnezzar the dream and what it means, and Nebuchadnezzar is like, oh my gosh, you're amazing. And, from then on out, I mean, Daniel is just he's like this kind of spiritual advisor for different kings and, administrations, you might say. The first half of Daniel is more straightforward and really interesting, and there's a lot of examples of great courage and wisdom that I think is, fantastic to, put to practice in your own life. I mean, Daniel and his friends persevere. They do not compromise their faith. They do not compromise what they believe to be true in the face of persecution, even by the kings that they serve. Daniel's thrown into the lion's den, for goodness sake. The second half of the book of Daniel blew my mind. I was already on board for the first half, but the second half, holy crap. It reminded me of the book of Revelation. It is a wild trip. I mean, Daniel's visions, his dreams, they are so crazy. And as we're going to go over here in a little bit, a lot of his interpretations of what his dreams mean, if my Life Application Bible is to be believed regarding the historicity of Daniel's prophecies, then holy moly cow, Daniel was a true prophet who really did see the future coming, and through his dreams and through his visions. And I just can't wait to go over the different chapters, verses, and passages within the book of Daniel that I found to be incredibly just gripping, mind-blowing, fascinating, and everything between those things that I just listed. And so without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's jump into the analysis portion of this review and analysis video on the book of Daniel. The first passage I would like to read and discuss is Daniel chapter 2, verses 29 to 35. And this is where Daniel recounts Nebuchadnezzar's first dream to Nebuchadnezzar, proving that Daniel is in fact a true wise man. As you were lying there, O king, your mind turned to things to come, and the revealer of mysteries showed you what is going to happen. As for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because I have greater wisdom than any other living men, but so that you, O king, may know the interpretation, and that you may understand what went through your mind. You looked, O king, and there before you stood a large statue, an enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. The head of the statue was made of pure gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of baked clay. While you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were broken to pieces at the same time and became like chaff on a threshing floor in the summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace. But the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. Now, I'm not going to read the rest of the chapter. I suggest you read it yourself if you haven't already. But I do want to read you a footnote in my Life Application Bible that contextualizes the dream, that Daniel just recounted here regarding history. And I gotta say, it is astounding. So I'm just gonna read this footnote and allow it to blow your mind. The head of gold on the statue in the dream represented Nebuchadnezzar, ruler of the Babylonian Empire. The silver chest and 2 arms represented the Medo-Persian Empire, which conquered Babylon in 539 BC. The belly and thighs of bronze were Greece and Macedonia under Alexander the Great, who conquered the Medo-Persian Empire in 334 to 330 BC. The legs of iron represented Rome, which conquered the Greeks in 63 BC. The feet of clay and iron represented the breakup of the Roman Empire, when the territory Rome ruled divided into a mixture of strong and weak nations. The type of metal in each part depicted the strength of the political power it represented. The rock cut out of the mountain depicted God's kingdom, which would be ruled eternally by the Messiah, the King of Kings. The dream revealed Daniel's God as the power behind all earthly kingdoms. What's fascinating is that when you read that and then you look at Daniel's description of Nebuchadnezzar's dream, it does seem as if the history lines up with the prophecy. If that truly is the case, then holy crap, my mind is just, it's spinning. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we come to chapter 3. This chapter, it just shook me by the shoulders and was like, Carter, this is the attitude that you should have when you're persecuted for the truth. Or for what's right, or for God. This story right here, Nebuchadnezzar is basically, he builds this giant gold idol, and he wants everybody to worship it. But of course, the Jews, primarily some of Daniel's associates, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, refuse to bow down and worship this gold statue that Nebuchadnezzar has ordered everyone to worship. And of course, the penalty for not worshiping this gold statue, according to Nebuchadnezzar, is that you must be thrown into a fiery furnace and die there. But they, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, say, no, we're not going to do it. And I want to read verses 16 through 18. And I just want you to, just grasp how committed these guys are. And how punk rock this is, this move they pull right here. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. Basically, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are like, King Nebuchadnezzar, even if God doesn't save us from this, even if we endure the worst pain and die a horrible, horrible death, we want you to know that we will never bow down and worship you or anything that you order us to worship, because we serve the Most High God. You can shove it. You can take your little games and play them on someone else. But guess what? You're not in control, and we are never going to act as if you are in control in the way that our God is in control. I mean, they were like, look, our God will save us, but guess what? Even if he doesn't, it still doesn't prove anything. And I just thought that attitude was so striking. It's just no matter what, they were committed to God and to the truth, and we're not going to compromise, not even in the face of Armageddon. And now I'd like to read some footnotes regarding this chapter that I think, they spoke to me, and I think they'll speak to you. Here are 8 excuses that, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego could have used to bow to the image and save their lives. 1, we will fall down, but not actually worship the idol. 2, we won't become idol worshippers, but will worship it this one time, and then ask God for forgiveness. 3, the king has absolute power, and we must obey him. God will understand. 4, the king appointed us. We owe this to him. 5, this is a foreign land, so God will excuse us for following the customs of the land. 6, our ancestors set up idols in God's temple. This isn't half as bad. 7, we're not hurting anybody. 8, If we get ourselves killed and some pagans take our high positions, they won't help our people in exile. Although all these excuses sound sensible at first, they are dangerous rationalizations. To fall down and worship the image would violate God's command in Exodus chapter 20, verse 3. You shall have no other gods before me. It would also erase their testimony for God forever. Never again could they talk about the power of their God above all other gods. What excuses do you use for not standing up for him? Next footnote, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were pressured to deny God, but they chose to be faithful to him no matter what happened. They trusted God to deliver them, but they were determined to be faithful regardless of the consequences. If God always rescued those who were true to him, Christians would not need faith. Their religion would be a great insurance policy, and there would be lines of selfish people ready to sign up. We should be faithful to serve God whether he intervenes on our behalf or not. Our eternal reward is worth any suffering we may have to endure first. That last footnote I really think is worth contemplating, so contemplate it! Oh, one more thing I want to talk about concerning this chapter that I thought was really interesting is verse 25. I'm just going to read it and we'll discuss briefly. This is Nebuchadnezzar speaking. Look! I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods. Nobody exactly knows who the 4th figure in the fiery furnace was, but he wasn't thrown in there and he didn't come out, but he appeared and appeared to be protecting his faithful adherents, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And so, I speculate, and it kind of seems the most obvious to me, that either this 4th figure was some sort of angel or Jesus. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we come to chapter 4. Now, this chapter I'm just going to discuss in its entirety. I don't have any passages marked, but just the whole chapter is wild. Nebuchadnezzar, he gets another dream and he goes to Daniel like, hey, what does this mean? I'm kind of frightened by it. And the dream is, of course, of this giant tree, this amazing tree that's healthy, brings health and plenty to all the animals and all the people. But in the dream, it's like, it's cut down to a stump and there's crazy stuff happening. And Daniel explains to King Nebuchadnezzar that he is that tree. It is his kingdom. But because of his pride, because of his unwillingness to, help the oppressed, his unwillingness to realize that, he is not God, because of all these things, he will, his kingdom will remain like the stump of a tree remains, but he will be brought low to the level of being basically an animal, eating the grass of the field and, waking up with dew on his face and all of that. And that's essentially what the dream means. And what's crazy about, the story is that actually ends up happening. King Nebuchadnezzar is brought low to the point where he's like an animal. And then, of course, the chapter ends with him looking up to heaven, and then his sanity is restored, and he goes back to being king, but a much wiser king than before, recognizing that God has the power to humble him. Moving on to Daniel chapter 5. This chapter takes place after King Nebuchadnezzar. Now Babylon is ruled by King Belshazzar. And this chapter deals with the big banquet that King Belshazzar throws with all of his nobles and advisors, where they take the Jewish, holy, goblets and just things of the temple, and they use them to just have a wild, drunk party. And what ends up happening in this party is a hand just forms out of nowhere and writes this inscription on a wall. And of course, King Belshazzar is just like freaked out. And he's like, can anyone tell me what this is? What does this mean? None of, King Belshazzar's advisors can tell him. But then the queen is like, hey, I know somebody, Daniel. He knew your father, and he's a wise man that might be able to tell you what all this means. And so Daniel's brought in, and he kind of diagnoses the problem. And, it's kind of like King Belshazzar has the same issue with pride and arrogance as his father, and therefore The inscription that was written, which was called Min Min Tekel Parsin, meant Min, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Peres, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. This is what Daniel explained. Daniel's prophecy came true that very night because the king was slain, and then King Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. So again, I gotta check out, like, independently the historicity of Daniel's prophecies. But if that's true, I mean, my goodness, man, Daniel is quite the seer. And now we come to chapter 6, which is where Daniel is in the lion's den. Now this chapter, I think, is just a testament to the strength of character and commitment that Daniel had to serving God. And I think it's something worth emulating because, I mean, if you read the chapter, King Darius, he's convinced by these people, by some advisors who want to get Daniel out of the picture. He's convinced that he should, issue a decree that no one can worship any god that is not King Darius. And, of course, Daniel does not worship King Darius. Instead, he worships, the God of Israel, and he is caught doing that. According to the law of the Medes and the Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed. And so King Darius was even tricked. He was tricked into, basically condemning Daniel. And that is why he is very sorrowful over Daniel being thrown into the lion's den, which was the penalty that he had assigned for anyone who had worshipped another god other than King Darius. When Daniel's thrown in with all the lions, he expects that Daniel's just going to be ripped to shreds. But then the following day, or whatever, Daniel is alive. And, of course, King Darius rejoices and then throws all of the advisors, including their wives and children who had tricked him into betraying Daniel, into the lion's den, and they're all immediately devoured, which, I would say that's a pretty harsh medieval tactic by old King Darius. He's by no means a spiritual character to emulate. But Daniel, the courage to, in the face of being thrown into a lion's den, to say, you know what? No, I'm not going to forsake my God. That is something extremely admirable. And since he wasn't torn to shreds by the lions, he had a profound impact on King Darius. The ending of the chapter is King Darius just being like, your God is the living God. Like, everybody needs to revere your God. Chapter 7. Now this is where the book of Daniel goes from like really, really good and interesting and cool to, oh my gosh, like, oh my gosh. Of course, chapter 7 deals with Daniel's dream of the 4 beasts. And I gotta say, like, the whole chapter, like, it gets very apocalyptic in a way. He's clearly talking about the end times at certain points. I mean, literally at one point, God himself, like, sits on a throne in Daniel's vision and, like, has all these books opened and is ready to judge multitudes of people. But let's go ahead and read Daniel's description of the 4 beasts, which was part of his dream. And this is verse 2 through 8. Daniel said, in my vision at night I looked, and there before me were the 4 winds of heaven churning up the great sea. 4 great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea. The first was like a lion, and it had the wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground, so that it stood on 2 feet like a man, and the heart of a man was given to it. And there before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. It was told, get up and eat your fill of flesh. After that I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard, and on its back it had 4 wings like those of a bird. This beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule. After that, in my vision at night I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large teeth, large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims, and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts. It had 10 horns. While I was thinking about the horns, there before me was another horn, a little one, which came up among them. And 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. This horn had eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth that spoke boastfully. Okay, now I want to read one of the footnotes in my Bible that contextualizes what this portion of Daniel's dream perhaps means. and it's gonna blow your mind, because it certainly blew mine. The lion with an eagle's wings represents Babylon with her swift conquests. Statues of winged lions have been recovered from Babylon's ruins. The bear that ravaged the lion is Medo-Persia. The 3 ribs in its mouth represent the conquests of 3 major enemies. The leopard is Greece. Its wings show the swiftness of Alexander the Great's campaign, as he conquered much of the civilized world in 4 years. The leopard's 4 heads are the 4 divisions of the Greek Empire after Alexander's death. The 4th beast points to both Rome and the end times. Many biblical scholars believe that the horns correspond to 10 kings who will reign shortly before God sets up his everlasting kingdom. These 10 kings had still not come to power at the time of John's vision recorded in the book of Revelation. The little horn is a future human ruler, or the Antichrist. God is illustrating the final end of all worldly kingdoms in contrast to his eternal kingdom. Now chew on that. Daniel's vision of the ram and the goat in chapter 8 is so nuts. Basically, there's this ram that has one horn that's much bigger than the other, and it is confronted by this flying goat with a very prominent horn that destroys its 2 horns. And, the vision goes on from there. Whenever Daniel learns what the dream means, he's told, what it means by the angel Gabriel, who predicts that the goat with the one prominent horn that shatters the horns of the ram, he predicts that is representing Greece. That's really, really freaky. That kind of makes me go, wow. I'd just like to read a couple of the footnotes that really, really freaked me out concerning this chapter, because, Daniel, really right here, really did predict, Alexander the Great, Greece coming in and breaking up, all these kingdoms. And, I'm just going to read this stuff because it's nuts. But this is a clear, Daniel was seeing stuff that was gonna go down. The 2 horns were the kings of Media and Persia. This was concerning the ram. The longer horn represented the growing dominance of Persia in the Medo-Persian Empire. The goat represented Greece, and its large horn, Alexander the Great. This is an amazing prediction, because Greece was not yet considered a world power when this prophecy was given. Alexander the Great conquered the world with great speed and military strategy, indicated by the goat's rapid movement. Shattering both horns symbolized Alexander breaking both parts of the Medo-Persian Empire. Alexander the Great died in his 30s at the height of his power. His kingdom was split into 4 parts under 4 generals: Ptolemy I of Egypt and Palestine, Seleucus of Babylonia and Syria, Lysimus, whatever that means, of Asia Minor, and Antipater of Macedon and Greece. As far as I can tell, all of that history lines up with Daniel's prophecy. Coincidence? I think not. Moving on to chapters 10 and 11, I was really struck within those 2 chapters by Daniel's the weight of these, revelations. They were torturing him. He was oh my gosh, this is just too much for me to know. But in addition to that, chapters 10 and 11 deals with Daniel's vision of a man, a chrysolite man who's I guess translucent or some weird, angel or perhaps even Jesus situation. This being, instructs and informs Daniel about basically the end times. He describes the conflict between the king of the king of the north and the south, and just this antichrist type figure that will come and conquer everybody, and there'll be this great war. The Antichrist won't fully succeed, but it's just the whole thing is so bonkers, but it also feels so true at the same time. It's really, really freaky. I've got one passage I want to read in chapter 11 concerning what times will be like for wise people and for good people, righteous people who have understanding of what's going on. This is Daniel chapter 11, verse 33 to 35. This passage is just kind of a broadcast, a forecast of what it will be like for those who choose to stand up when everyone else sits down and submits to chaos. Those who are wise will instruct many, though for a time they will fall by the sword, or be burned, or captured, or plundered. When they fall, they will receive a little help, and many who are not sincere will join them. Some of the wise will stumble, so that they may be refined, purified, and made spotless until the time of the end, for it will still come at the appointed time. What I take from this little passage is like, yeah, the end times, the times of persecution and hardship are going to be hard, and a lot of people are going to just get, wiped out, and the ones that aren't wiped out are going to stumble. They're probably going to, make some poor choices, might even prove themselves to be cowards at certain times. But all of that, at least for the truly wise, will only refine them. They'll realize, oh, I shouldn't have apologized for that. I'm never going to apologize for anything unless I've actually done something wrong. And those wise people will be made spotless through, working on their own moral character and, speaking the truth boldly in the face of the mob. Hard times often produce, some of the best of humanity. And this passage is kind of predicting that. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we come to chapter 12, which is the last chapter in the book of Daniel. And it is, much like all the other chapters in the book of Daniel, extremely fascinating. There are a couple passages I want to read. This is, of course, also having to do with the end times, as were many of the previous chapters. But there are a couple of passages and verses in here that I think are worth going over individually. The first passage I would like to go over is Daniel chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. And, this is still, Daniel being, spoken to through a vision, through this chrysolite being. This is what he says. And I think this is really interesting to see this in the book of Daniel, especially when you think of the New Testament. So without further ado, let's read the verses and then we'll discuss why I think that's so interesting. At that time, Michael, the great prince who protects your people, will arise. There will be a time of distress, such as has not happened from the beginning of the nations until then. But at that time, your people, everyone whose name is found written in the book, will be delivered. Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt. Here, basically, what is being said concerning the end times is that there will be a resurrection, which is in line with the prophecies in the New Testament. But this is rare to read about in the Old Testament, and that's what I find so interesting. Now, the next passage I would like to read and discuss is Daniel chapter 12, verses 5 through 7. Brief little thing you got to know if you just so that this is not confusing to you. The man in linen that's floating above the river, that's the chrysolite man I described earlier. Let's read the passage and then we'll discuss it. Then I, Daniel, looked, and there before me stood two others, one on this bank of the river and one on the opposite bank. One of them said to the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, "How long will it be before these astonishing things are fulfilled?" The man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, lifted his right hand and his left hand toward heaven. And I heard him swear by him who lives forever, saying, "It will be for a time, times, and half a time. When the power of the holy people has been finally broken, all these things will be completed." First of all, that's just like a really cool visual there. But secondly, there is a footnote in my Bible that really gets one thinking. So I'm going to read it and we will discuss. Keep in mind the line, "When the power of the holy people has been finally broken, all these things will be completed." Keep that in mind as I read this footnote. The power of the holy people seems to be crushed again and again throughout history. God's recurring purpose in this is to break the pride and self-sufficiency of his rebellious people and to bring them to accept him as their Lord. The big message that the Old Testament is trying to get across to those who read it is that civilizations, whenever they hold firmly to doing God's will, then their civilization will prosper and do great. But what the Old Testament is trying to kind of get across is that as soon as these civilizations reach their cultural zenith, they think, oh, we don't need this God thing anymore. You know what? We're self-sufficient. We don't need any of this. We don't need tradition. We don't need to hold firmly to these old, ancient, archaic truths. No, let's do away with that. The pride then leads to the fall because they think that they know what's best regarding morality and things that are ultimate, when in reality, they know almost nothing. They have forgotten that the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. When the power of the holy people has been finally broken, all these things will be completed. Whenever humanity just finally realizes, you know what, we can do absolutely nothing without God, then it'll be okay. Anyways though, ladies and gentlemen, those are my thoughts on the book of Daniel. It was fantastic. One of my favorite books in the entire Bible. Just blew me out of the water. It is a must read. It's fantastic in just about every single way. So please do read it. If you have read it, please leave whatever thoughts and comments you might have in the comment section below. And if you have not read the book of Daniel, still, if you have something to say, leave it in the comment section below. And as always, ladies and gentlemen, if you like this video, please like it and subscribe, tell your friends about the channel, and never forget to